Well, welcome everybody. I'm super excited for this next presentation. It's actually our second presentation from Microsoft so far during this event. And I want to introduce to all of you guys Erica Tully. She's a Microsoft Compliance MVP, and she'll be talking today about real-world deployment strategies for Microsoft Records Management that you can employ in your organization. So I'll remind everyone to ask Erica questions by clicking the little Q&A tab in the top right-hand menu, and she'll respond at the end of her presentation. So I'll now pass on over to Erica to get started.
Hello, and welcome to Real World Deployment Strategies with Microsoft Records Management. I'm your presenter today, Erica Tully, a Microsoft MVP focused on compliance. This year has been unprecedented for the rise of remote work, and remote work requires collaboration systems. This has presented a lot of interesting challenges for organizations today, which is evidenced by the numbers below. In November 2019, there were 20 million users of Microsoft Teams, which is the remote collaboration and meeting software. In only March of 2020, that number had risen to 44 million. And then in April of 2020, that exploded to 75 million active users. This creates unique challenges for records management because with this explosion in remote work is an explosion of data sources and content that needs to be managed for retention. How do we manage this challenge? First, find high-risk categories of information and focus your efforts there. You're the expert on your retention schedule. Prioritize the files that pose the most risk to your organization and go meet with those teams and figure out the best strategy for managing those records. Next, be sure to engage with the stakeholders. Talk to them about how they do their daily work, where the records are stored, and figure out a process that helps to enable records management but not hinder productivity. Next, automate whenever possible. It would be great if end users could apply the right retention schedule with 100% accuracy, but that just doesn't happen. Through automation, we reduce risk of miscategorization or unmanaged content. And then finally, partner with your security team because we need to be able to apply protections to this high-risk data and to these important records, and then use something like data loss prevention to keep it from being leaked outside of the organization. How do we do a records management deployment? We like to recommend a crawl, walk, run approach. First, crawl. If you're in a situation where these collaboration tools were deployed very quickly in your organization and you didn't have an opportunity to provide input as a records manager, start with the crawl phase. This can help with remediating your fast-paced deployment, or just focus on what's good enough right now, and then we'll work over time to get to great. Next is our walk category. This is where we're building a foundation for a successful long-term records management program in Microsoft 365. And then finally, in our end state, in our run category, we have a fully optimized records management system where we're leveraging automation and using machine learning to classify and find content. And then we're using analysis to periodically check in and make sure our records program's working as we expected so we can make adjustments along the way. Let's dive into each one of these categories. First, crawl. As hard as it is, sometimes we just have to get to good enough. Things are moving so quickly and we want to apply the best protections we can quickly. One way to do that is using broad retention buckets. We can apply high-level retention, say to all emails or all SharePoint sites, just to make sure that we're not losing data while we take the time to figure out our more granular records management program. For example, you might apply a 1-year retention to email to buy you a year of time, and then apply a more granular permission, which will override that 1-year retention period as that transition happens. Next is identifying those areas of high risk and focusing your efforts there. And then finally, releasing a set of simple manual labels for end users to categorize content can be another way to identify high-value records. This is our retention policy setting, which we would use to apply those broad buckets of retention categorization. We can set our retention period. We can also use it to delete content older than a certain age. And then we can target it towards those broad locations. As a side note, if you're using a capstone approach to Exchange records management, this is also a good option because you can include sites in this policy that need that extra long retention period. Next, you can allow end users to have a small number of manual labels, maybe to designate what's a record and what's not, so that you can make it immutable if needed. Now let's move on to our walk phase. This phase is where you're building a foundation for records management success. First, start with standardizing your site templates. These drive consistency in your information architecture across all your SharePoint sites. Second, make sure to leverage automation and machine learning to identify common types of content in your organization, no matter where they live. And then lastly, be sure to set up your analytics and reporting so you can see how labels are being automatically and manually applied over time, so you can use that data to drive decisions about your records management program. Let's start with explaining what is site provisioning. So what we do is create templates for the different types of sites in your organization. Those templates can contain things like common navigation, branding, memberships to other sites, but it can also include document libraries and lists, and then content types and managed metadata. A content type is a type of content, for example, a status report, or a client presentation, or an invoice, where you want to use a common template and have common metadata associated with that type of content, no matter where it lives in your SharePoint or your SharePoint structure. So as an example, let's say we have a project site. Whenever somebody creates a new project site, it automatically creates a deliverables document library with pre-built types of content that go into that deliverables library. It also includes a status column. So as an example, we might have a regular status report that we need to give to our customers. When I visit the document library and click New, there'll be a drop-down where I can select a status report template. When I complete that template, and when I save it back to the library, I can choose whether it's a draft or finalized. How does that help retention? Well, we can use these document properties to apply the right category from your retention schedule. As an example, we have our status report content type. When the column equals draft, we want to apply a 1-year retention, which is just the catch-all retention policy for all of our draft content. Once that year has passed, we'll just do nothing, and the content can live on or be deleted through an automated process. In a similar fashion, let's say that we have a presentation content type, and it's a presentation we've given to a customer. When I mark that presentation as final, it'll automatically apply a record label, making the file immutable, and use the right retention period. So in this case, we want to retain all final deliverables for 3 years, and then do a disposition review process for approval before the content is deleted. The important thing about this is that our content types and metadata are consistent across all of our project sites. And if I want to reuse those metadata or the content types in other types of sites, I can do that as well. And when I want to maintain or make changes to the content types or metadata, I can do that in one single location and have the changes flow out to everywhere it's used. The next thing we want to cover is our new document understanding model. This is how we can manage content and knowledge in Microsoft 365. This has 3 core features. So first is Project Cortex, which is a new solution offering from Microsoft. This allows you to manage knowledge in your organization. We also have SharePoint Syntax, which allows you to do content processing. This can build AI models to recognize forms or common types of documents, like a contract, in your organization. And then when it finds that, it can apply the right content type automatically, and it could even extract out values from that document to populate your metadata. And then once it's identified the content type and the metadata, we can, of course, automatically apply our retention policies based on those properties. Our other way to use machine learning for records management is using our compliance trainable classifiers. Microsoft has provided some out-of-the-box templates for these classifiers, such as resumes and source code. Or you could also build your own classifier to work with unique information for your organization. The ones I see people starting with the most are things like invoices and contracts, where there's a pretty consistent template, and sometimes they're saved in all sorts of places. By using a trainable classifier, we can identify those contracts or invoices no matter where they are in your SharePoint deployment. Lastly, we want to drive our records management program using analytics. Our Activity Explorer reporting tool allows you to see all the actions that have been taken by end users for your retention labels. As an example, you can see when someone applies a label manually or when a process applies the label automatically. You can also see when labels are changed or, if allowed, when they're removed. This allows you to make sure that your labels are being used as intended, and it can help you have data to see if any adjustments should be made. You can also use the Content Explorer tool to see all documents that have a certain label applied. If you want to see all the documents, emails that have a certain retention policy, you can drill down to these locations to view all those documents. Once there, you can even see the contents of the documents if you have the appropriate permissions. Lastly, we have our run phase. This is where we're really optimizing records management in Microsoft 365. We're building on that foundation of success to really take our program to the next level. This is where we also are spending a lot more time automating our records processes. The records managers are spending less time on maintenance, and users are spending less time applying manual labels. Then we're also automating our records processes with other systems. So for example, if we want to integrate event-based retention with our HR system to know when an employee end date happens so we can start the retention on their employee documents, we can do that as well. This is where we're also looking for continuous improvement. Retention laws and regulations are always changing. Your organization's constantly evolving, and our records management program needs to be flexible to meet those changes. For example, if we want to use event-based retention in Office 365, we can set that in our retention label. In the retention label, you choose how the retention period is triggered. You can see we can use created, modified, when information was labeled, or we could choose an event, like the end of a fiscal year or an employee leaving the organization. Then we can fill out metadata or have an automated process complete the metadata to have a unique identifier for what documents are related to that event. For example, in the case of a project end date, we would tag all of the deliverables with the appropriate asset ID. Of course, using our site templates, we can do this automatically. Then how do we automate event-based retention at scale? Well, first of all, we want to integrate into other systems for those triggers as much as possible. This might be the employee end date coming from an HR system, or a project number coming from your project provisioning system. We want to auto-apply our retention labels and complete that unique identifier or asset ID in as automated of a process as possible. And then finally, for the event creation, that's where we want to take the triggers from other line of business systems. So how do we auto-apply the labels? We can do that by identifying both the content type and the metadata, as we said before, but also use that unique identifier. You can also use retention labels to apply content to sensitive information. So for example, if you have some financial data that you want to protect with a retention period, or maybe you don't want it to be in SharePoint, so you want it to always be deleted and you want to have a deletion policy, you can say, if Australian financial data is found in this document, then take the action to retain or delete it. Continuous improvement. So as much as we wish this wasn't true, our records management program is always evolving. There's always more ways to integrate records management into your existing business processes. So for example, if you have an approval process for invoices and you're putting metadata in a column for the amount of that invoice, maybe it's routing it to one person if it's over $50,000, a different person if it's under, and then maybe that you have a different retention period for documents that's over 50,000 or under 50,000. Work with your business stakeholders to figure out how to integrate records management as a part of their normal course of business instead of it being a separate activity. Continually scan for this sensitive data using the sensitive information types to help identify those high-risk files and things that should be more protected using information protection or data loss prevention. Keep monitoring your reporting, see how labels are being applied, changed, or removed, to see if maybe you need to make some adjustments to your retention management processes. And then finally, always look for opportunities to partner with your legal department and with your security teams, because honestly, they probably could really benefit from your knowledge of the types of categories of content that exist in your organization, and then helping them understand those categories and how high risk they are will then help them to apply the best protections using Microsoft Information Protection and data loss prevention. Ultimately, you have a well-governed, secure, and well-managed system. That's our crawl, walk, run approach to deploying Microsoft Records Management. Here's some resources you can use to learn more about Microsoft Records Management and get started.